Welcome to Brilliantly British. My name is Lawrence, and today I'm going to show you how to make these two loaves here. Why, you ask? Because British Sandwich Week is just around the corner. I mean, it is literally just around the corner. It starts on May the 17th, and to make a sandwich, of course, you need bread. And I'd recommend using these loaves that you see here. We've got a round one and we've got a square one. They are relatively simple to make, and I'm going to show you how to make them step by step. And the best thing about them, your entire flat, your house, is going to smell like a bakery. And as I stand here talking to you now, I am intoxicated with the smell of bread. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode. Today we're going to be making two loaves of bread, and for both of these loaves you will need the following ingredients. You will need some brown sugar, some salt, some warm water, some white bread flour, some yeast, our leavening agent, and some wholemeal flour. Now the sandwich loaf is going to have a bit more texture and a bit more of a crunch to it. So we're going to add some sesame seeds, some pumpkin seeds, and some sunflower seeds. And of course you're going to be cooking, and in this case baking, so get yourself something to drink. In this case I recommend a nice cup of hot tea. To get ourselves started, we're going to activate our yeast, and this is simply to test and see if our yeast is alive and kicking and is suitable for the dough that we are going to make. So in will go our yeast. Make sure the water as well is warm and no hotter than body temperature. We're going to feed our yeast whilst we try to wake it up by feeding it with a little bit of sugar. Whisk this in thoroughly and make sure that the yeast and the sugar are completely dissolved. Now we're going to leave this for 10 minutes, and if in 10 minutes we don't see bubbles on here, then we know the yeast is dead. If we see bubbles on here, then we know fermentation is happening and there's a party going on, a yeast party. Whilst we're testing our yeast, now's the right time to mix together the dry ingredients of our dough. Just mix this together like so, just making sure everything is well incorporated and is well distributed. Now that we've prepared our wet ingredients and have separately prepared our dry ingredients, now's the time to bring those two elements together. And we're going to use this wooden spoon, which you'll recognize, the one that's older than me. And gradually we're going to add our wet mixture into our dough. And this is how we want to mix the two elements together. Now the deceptive thing when mixing dough is that it can appear dry, because flour does actually need some time to absorb the liquid. So be very careful about adding more liquid, especially when you think it looks dry. It's much better as well to develop and learn to use your hands to mix dough, because then you can develop a feel for the dough. You'll know whether it's too dry, too wet. So what we have here is a shaggy dough, and as you can see, it hasn't been properly mixed together, but all of the moisture has been somewhat absorbed, but not completely absorbed by the flour. So what we're going to do is leave this to sit for 10 minutes. This will give us a better indication of the state of our dough, whether we need to add more water or add more flour. We've let our dough rest for 10 minutes. So here's the big reveal. And yes, I can say I'm happy with the consistency of this dough. Keep the bowl, because we're going to need this to proof this dough in later on. Now I can tell you that this dough feels really good to the touch. If you can, knead with one hand and keep the other hand free to use a dough scraper, which I'd recommend you get, or just keeping a hand free in case you need to grab some extra flour to dust the surface or whatever. But this dough feels really good. It's very therapeutic and it's a good way to relieve stress. You can see we're gradually starting to develop the gluten here. Now the dough is sticking a little bit, but not too much that I can't handle it. Don't panic as well if this is the case. As we develop the gluten, the dough will start to come together a lot more and will stick a lot less. But if you have one of these, you can very easily clean your hands. Okay, we can do a quick test to see if we've kneaded enough, just by trying to form a tight ball like so. Now I'm going to grease this bowl. Distribute this around the bowl. This will prevent the surface here forming a hard skin, which will ultimately restrict our dough from rising, which is what we definitely don't want. This is now going to go into my oven with the oven switched off, but just the light on, because that'll create a nice warm environment, but not too warm to kill the yeast. Whilst the dough is proving, we're going to prepare the bread pan that we're going to actually bake in. So brush this with a little bit of oil. Then the next thing to do is to pour in some flour and then just coat the inside. And there you have it, a coated bread pan. Our dough has risen nicely. Now I'm going to turn this out onto a floured surface. And I'm just going to knock this back a bit, just flatten it out. We're making this out now to be somewhat of a square or rectangle shape. And we want this to have roughly the same width as the bread pan. Make sure this is nice and tight. And so in the pan it goes, like so. And now this is going to be left to rise again until it's almost around about doubled in size. I've put a damp tea towel on top of the dough here just to prevent it from forming a skin. The dough has risen nicely and is ready to go into a preheated oven. This bowl of hot water will also go into the oven, which will act as a source of steam, helping our bread to rise and develop a nice crust. Just like the sandwich loaf, for the round loaf, I'll firstly knock back the dough before shaping it with my hands into a compact and taut ball. I'll be baking this round loaf in a lidded cast iron pan, so I'll proof it on some parchment paper, covering it with a cloth soaked in warm water. Whilst the dough rises, and for best results, as the oven preheats, I'll lay in a reservoir of water and a lidded cast iron pan, as it needs to be as hot as the oven whilst the bread bakes within it. The proof dough is ready for the oven, but first, with a sharp knife, I'll decoratively and purposefully score its surface to encourage it to rise upwards whilst it bakes. After scoring, I'll quickly and safely fetch my ripping hot cast iron pan before returning it to the oven for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, I'll remove my bowl of water from the oven, as well as uncover the loaf. The loaf will bake for a further 20 minutes to bronze up and form a thick crust. Thank you so much for sticking around to see the end of this episode. You should now know how to make both of these loaves. These loaves are going to play a pivotal role in the 7-episode bonanza that we're having to celebrate British Sandwich Week. We're going to release a sandwich every day, and these loaves in front of you, in front of me, are going to play an important role. So enjoy the week to come, and thank you so much for watching. If you like this episode, click the like button, subscribe to this channel, and share the good news about brilliantly British food.